Welcome on in, folks. This is Sprues and Studs and Bandai action figure fans. It is your turn to shine under the 6000K LED lights of my review, well, lights. In this one, we are going to be taking a very close look at the newly released Blood Angels Assault Intercessor to see if this action figure is going to be worth the price of admission or not. So there's nothing to do but to dive right in. All right, it appears that this box has like a decorative outer sleeve here. This is the box itself, and I believe this is the front, obviously. So let's get inside of the box itself. Here it is, nice shiny plastic. We will finally get to the good stuff, which is to open up this Blood Angels Intercessor. And there is the clear, unobstructed view of it. And lastly, underneath all that plastic is obviously the backpack as well as the swappable hands. All right, before we dive into the review, I'm just going to comment on this Blood Angels Intercessor's general aesthetics and how I feel about it. So at cursory glance, I'm just going to say that this color is weird. I usually want my Blood Angels to be a fairly bright red color, and this almost gives like a burnt orange kind of glow. And also, as I pick up this action figure here, it feels very light, feels very hollow in my opinion. And weirdly enough, there's like no substance behind it. Like when you pick up a Joy Toy action figure and when you pick up a McFarlane action figure or even the Bandai Primaris Captain, there's a heft to it. So that's what I'm going to say about the aesthetics before we dive into the review. And as usual, it's time to take a deep dive in and see what Bandai Namco has graced us with. So up top, you have a very accurate assault-colored yellow helmet that the Blood Angels sport. Now, I think that many of you are going to comment that this has kind of a cartoonish kind of anime feel, and I do agree with you on that one. I will have to say also that the painting for a $110 figure up top here could use a little bit more shading. You also have a flat green lens, and as I said before, flat green lenses look a little bit primitive in these day and ages. This pauldron is completely unadorned and black, obviously. There seems to be some shading on the outer edges of this thing. As we look on down to the lower arm, it is very clear that there is a ton of shading that is on the outer parts here. Bandai has done a very interesting job of accentuating the highs of this action figure, and I'm not sure if I actually agree with this area in that I think that if it's on the outer edges, it actually should be lighter in color. So while we're on this side also, there is a heraldic shield. Clearly there is the characteristic skull that you see on most Imperium stuff, and then the checkered pattern of white on one side and then red on the other. Let's flip around and see what's going on over here. And clearly there is a Blood Angels symbol, and then the characteristic band that goes around the pauldron. And there are these blood vials that are dangling down. And once again, I'm going to say disappointingly enough, I believe these things should be a metallic red color at least. And this is just unfortunately a flat red. You have this golden icon over here, completely unshaded. As we move on to the middle section of this action figure, clearly you get to see the winged skull. And there is some dry brushing that's happening here, and it looks just about as good as Joy Toy's dry brushing, which is, yeah, we all know the answer to that. There is some shading that's happening too in the armor panels. And if we look at the middle section of this action figure, it's fairly unadorned. There is this icon of a blood tear. You clearly see a bunch of armor panels on the outside of the legs here that's been extensively shaded. And on the back, there is definitely an airbrushed pouch here. So let's flip around to the other side and take a look at the rest of this action figure. So you have the fast attack symbol on this guy's knee here. So let's take a look at the chainsword. The chainsword is actually very black. I was hoping to see a little bit of differentiation of color. And the teeth of this chainsword is a very dark gunmetal metallic. However, I usually like my chainswords with a sharp contrast of a light silver color. So this thing just looks kind of almost like a black blob. So taking a look at the heavy bolt pistol here, Clearly there are two colors that are involved with it. There is the black casing here and then gunmetal around the other edges. I'll have to say the gunmetal is fairly messily airbrushed on, which is kind of unfortunate. So as we take a look at the backpack, I'm going to say that at least Bandai decided to make the vents black. So at least there's some sort of differentiation between the color of the armor. All right, let's see how this action figure swaps out its hands compared to, let's just say, the Joy Toy one. So actually it comes off very fluidly and very smoothly, which is nice. And then let's see how this other hand pops on. It seems like I have to put a little bit force to it, but overall I think there's less force that I have to put to replace like a Joy Toy hand. All right, let's see how well this Intercessor holds its weapons. So we're gonna slot the weapons in right here. And actually it slots in very nicely, as you can see here. You got the finger around the trigger very nicely. If you flip around to the other side, it looks very nice and snug here. And let's see how the chainsword fits. It looks like with the chainsword, once again, you're gonna have to do a little bit of finagling. But you can get the chainsword in fairly well. And also, before we get to the articulation, let's see how this backpack fits on. Fairly nicely. Very smooth, very snug. In terms of articulation-wise, I'll have to say that it is very smooth when I bend this stuff back and forth as I spin the head around 360 degrees. And the arms glide very, very smoothly. This ball and socket joint here is very nice. And it's very fluid as you move this thing back and forth. So I believe this is where the quality of the Bandai action figure is. It's just like how everything fits and glides nicely. The pauldron actually does remind me of how the current Dark Angels Terminators are, where you have this little joint here that pops out and the pauldron is attached to the peg. And it appears that the torso to the waist area, there is resistance here. As you can hear, you can pivot it around 360 degrees, but you can hear this squeaking of the plastics, and it's very tough to get around. So that part of it is not very smooth. The interesting thing about the Bandai action figures, it's got this joint here that's actually in the front of it rather than the middle of it. So you're allowed to kind of bend the action figure forwards like this. And the elbows have very decent motion as well. The knees also have a decent amount of motion. And as you can hear, there is a ratcheting mechanism for the knee. There is a good amount of movement for this action figure as you kick it out here, as you kick it out back. Looks like this is just about as far as it can go without me actually breaking the action figure. With regards to the feet, you have some pivoting action back here. It is also very tough to move this thing around. I'm sure over time you can loosen it, but you can hear the squeaking of it. The toes actually have this mechanism that you can bend it up for posing too. So clearly we have the Ultramarines Bandai on the right hand side, and let's just compare the cosmetic differences in terms of like the shading and stuff. So I'm going to say that at first glance here, there's more shading on the Ultramarine helmet, as you can see. As we look at the pauldron areas, clearly it's very hard to shade black. So there is shading here on the Ultramarine. This forearm guard, or whatever you want to call it, is markedly larger than the Ultramarine one. And then clearly there is this icon right here, whereas the Ultramarine does not. With regards to the middle section here, obviously there is more highlighting and there's this heraldic shield on this side, whereas the Ultramarine does not. As we progress on down, it looks pretty much 100% the same with no changes whatsoever, except that the Blood Angels one is rocking a amulet here. And the last thing that we're going to take a look at is this bolt rifle fits into the Blood Angel's hands, and I'm going to assume at cursory glance that it does, but there's only one way to tell, and it looks like it needs a little bit of finagling to get it to fit. However, as you can see here, it does fit 100%. There is no issues whatsoever. The finger is around the trigger, and it is very snug, and it does not appear that it will fall. All right, Blood Angels fans, let me know what you think of this action figure based on my review in the comment section below, and if you are going to be pulling the trigger on this action figure or not. So after the review, I'm a little lukewarm on this action figure. Now I'm going to highlight the things that I do like about this action figure. So clearly it is fairly large. In fact, it is about the same size as a McFarlane action figure, which is around 7 inches tall. And I would have to say I really like the articulation of this action figure. It seems to be a lot more fluid and smooth compared to the Joy Toy and the McFarlane one. However, I think that what I like kind of stops there, to be honest, because first of all, just with the aesthetics of this thing, I think the color is very detracting, to be honest. It looks like an orange color rather than a Blood Angel's red. And the second thing that I'm not too much of a fan of is just like the shading on this thing. It's shaded on the highest regions of the armor panels, which is a kind of odd thing to do, because on the highest regions, you would think that's where the highlights are. And obviously, from the sculpt of the Ultramarine's Intercessor, there are actually barely any changes that happen with this action figure whatsoever, minus the forearm guard change, as well as the 2 different weapons that have changed. And that's really pretty much it. It's just the reskin and recolor of the Ultramarines one. So is this going to be worth $110 spent on this action figure? I'm going to say really not. I'd rather get 3 of the same Joy Toy action figures of the same type of this Assault Intercessor instead of getting one of these guys. So I'm going to say, let me buy this action figure so you don't have to. So anyways, members of the chapter, thanks for tuning in to this action figure review video. And with that being said, I'll see you all in the next one.